Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to be showing you how to create a 2D piece of concept art in Photoshop, and the project that we're going to be setting ourselves is recreating a Sneakoscope from the Harry Potter series. So let's dive straight into it. I'm going to go to Create New with Photoshop opened up, and I'm going to keep things nice and easy. I'm just going to click on an A4 document. I'm going to orientate it to landscape. I'm going to keep the resolution quite low just for demonstration purposes. However, if you're thinking of printing this or putting it online, you're really wanting to show it off, you'll want to bump that resolution up to about 600 at least, maybe 1200. With that done, I'm going to click on Create, and there's my document. So the first thing I want to do, I'm going to create my prop right in the center of my page, and I'm going to introduce some guides to help me find the center. So nice and easy to do. I'm going to go up to View at the top of my screen here, and I'm going to go down to New Guide Layout. And when I click on that, I get a little menu that appears over on the right hand side, and I should have some blue lines on my page. Now, depending on what you've done with this before, if you've never used it, your screen might look differently to mine. However, it's really simple to use. Effectively, here we have the number of columns. I've got 2, column 1, column 2, and I've got my rows, which is the same, row 1 and row 2. And I can click on these numbers and change them to whatever I like. However, I just want to cross in the center of my page to find the actual center, so that works out perfectly for me. So I'm going to hit OK on that. Nice and easy to remove the guides as well, and we'll be doing that quite a bit. We just go up to View and we go to Clear Guides, and that'll get rid of them. Right, so let's get actually started with our painting. First of all, let's bring in a background. So I've got some resources already that I'm going to use, and I've got this Gryffindor background here that I'm just going to click and drag into my image. There we go, and I'm going to slightly resize it, not too much. Maybe something like that. And I'm going to move my image around until it's in the center. And the way I'll be able to tell that, well, actually there's 2 ways. I've got this blue cross in the center of my image, and I can use that to kind of align it with the blue lines. But also, when it's in the center, you can see the blue lines actually turn a very deep pink, and that's basically the image snapping to that point. So that's actually in the center now. I'm happy with that, so I'm going to go to the top of my screen and click on this little tick to finalize that. There's my background, and there's my background in the layers panel. What I'm going to do is actually type Ctrl J with that layer selected, and that's going to create a copy. And this is important for 2 reasons. Number 1, there's some things we're going to do which is going to edit the background that we don't want. And the second reason is if there's anything we do accidentally, we've always got a backup there, so we don't have to bring anything in and resize it. So now we've done that, what I might do is actually bring up an image reference. So I've got a reference here from the Art of Harry Potter, and you can see we've got some of the initial Sneakoscope concepts, the final model, and some really nice drawings here. And I'm kind of going for a cross between these 2 here. I like this silver bit at the bottom of the Sneakoscope, and I'm not a fan of all these little kind of indentations on the rim of this one. So I'm going to kind of mix those 2 together. I'm not going to chop and change between the image because I think that's going to be distracting. However, hopefully you can see where my designs are coming from. Right, let's start off with the glass dome on top. I'm going to go over to the left-hand side of my screen where my toolbar is, and the first tool I'm going to use is the Marquee tool. And the Marquee tool is basically a way of selecting things in our image. So by default, you'll have the rectangular Marquee tool. And if I click and hold on that, a little menu pops up, and I want to go down to the second option where it says elliptical Marquee tool. And this works very similar to the shape tool. I can drag out a marquee like so, and I can hold shift to make it a perfect circle. And I've kind of got to eyeball how big I want my Sneakoscope to be. I don't want it to be too big because I quite like the background as well. Let's maybe do something like that. I'm going to move this into the center of my image, and you can actually see it snapping. Although the lines aren't turning purple with my marquee, I can see it snapping, so that's now dead center. The reason I've put this marquee tool down is to add a spherize effect, because we want, when we've got a glass dome on top of a background, it's actually going to distort what we see through it. So we need to spherize the dome, and this will probably make sense once we've actually done it. So let's dive into it. We're going to go up to the top of our screen where it says filter, and we're going to go down to distort, and then across to spherize. And when I click on that, a little menu pops up. And what you're most interested in is this here. This shows you how much the area you selected is going to spherize. So it's going to effectively look like an orb. And you may want to reduce the strength, or you may even want to invert it, in which case it's this slider here that you're interested in. I'm just going to click and drag that down, and you can see that at 0, everything's completely flat. And if I drag it all the other way, the sphere actually makes an indentation. I want it like this, so it looks like an orb. So I'm going to click OK. And nothing has really happened. In fact, all that's really changed here is that my image is partially zoomed in. So I'm going to press Ctrl Z to undo that. The reason that hasn't worked, and I see this quite a few times, is that the image I've selected isn't rasterized. And we can tell because I've got this little icon in the bottom corner of the thumbnail with, it's like a page with the corner folded over. Really easy to fix. Just right click on the layer, and about halfway up you've got rasterize layer. That icon disappears, and now when I go back to filter, it actually remembered the spherize that I did earlier, so I can just click on that right at the top, and now my image is starting to distort. You can actually go back up to filter and increase the effect by just applying it again. So I'm going to click on spherize again, and you can see it's distorted it even more. The final thing you want to do, don't click off, make sure you've still got this marquee enabled, is type Ctrl J on your keyboard, and that will copy what you've just done to a whole new layer. So I've actually got that orb isolated. In fact, if I get the move tool, which is the left-hand toolbar, very first tool, I can move that out of the way, and you can see I've got my orb separately. But remember what I said at the start, saying that some of the things we were going to do were actually going to mess with the background. You can see that it's still left an impression, even though I've just copied the orb separately. So if I press Ctrl Z to move that back into place, all I need to do is click on the layer below, delete it, and then when I move this, you see I've got a nice clean background. And the reason that's important is, although it wouldn't technically be accurate because of what we're seeing through this, you might want to move your prop around once you're finished with it, and I think you should be able to do that. Right, now what we want to do is we want to make this a little more orb-like. Yes, we've distorted the background, but it doesn't look like glass at the moment. It looks quite flat. So we're going to get our brush tool out. And that's on the left-hand side, about a third of the way down. I'm going to click on my brush tool, and we're going to use clipping masks to basically turn this into more of an orb. What I might do, because it's distracting, is just turn off the guides, because we don't need them for this bit. So I'm going to go up to View, and I'm going to go down to Clear Guides. And you can see, especially with the guides removed, how much this is actually blending into the background, and we don't want that. So I've got layer 1, which is my texture. I'm going to add a new layer, which is bottom right hand corner, this little square with a plus in it. There's my new layer. But what I'm doing now, I only want it to affect this area of my painting, so I need it to clip to this circle I've got here. And I right click on the layer and go up to create clipping mask. And I know that's worked because the layer moves over to the right and I've got a little arrow pointing down. So brush tool selected. I'm going to go up to my brushes at the top of my screen, and I'm going to bump the size up quite big actually. I'm going to push it to about 1000 pixels. And in my color palette, I'm actually going to select black. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to paint all the shadows of my orb. So really important that you follow the orb round when you do this. Don't paint up and down like that. I'm going to start at the top and I'm going to just follow the orb round. So already I know that my light's coming from the right hand side and it's about halfway down. In fact, I don't want that. I want my light to be further in the kind of top right hand corner. So I might just ease back a little bit and then come up like so. Just add a little bit of shadow there. Obviously way too strong, so I'm going to go over to my layer opacity over on the right hand side and I'm going to reduce that. In fact, I'm going to make it really low because I don't want this to be too strong. Just enough for it to stand out. So that opacity is 16%, and if I use the eye next to my layer here, you can actually see that that's making quite a big difference even at 16%. Okay, let's add a new layer. Right click and create clipping mask again. And I'm basically going to do the same thing, but I'm going to move my brush further over so I'm creating just slightly darker areas right on the side like so. So you can see that they're a bit further out. Again, I'm going to reduce the opacity, not as much as before. Say about 20%, and you can see the difference that's making as well. So new layer again, right click and create clipping mask, but instead of shadows now we're going to add highlights. So I'm going to change my color to white. I'm going to reduce my brush size. Let's bring it down to, in fact, let's change it to about 700. There we go. And going to paint a white area there. And I'm also going to bring my brush right down to about kind of 150, 200. And I'm also going to add a little highlight on the side where the background will be reflecting. Again, way too strong, but instead of just reducing the opacity, what I'm going to do is go over to the layer mode where it says normal, and I'm going to change it to overlay because I want the color of the background to be what's reflecting in this, well, effectively glass orb. It is a bit too strong, however, so I am going to reduce the opacity slightly. Not too much, that'll do. And then very last one, add a new layer, right click, create clipping mask, and I'm just going to keep the same brush and add a little highlight right in the top corner. Okay, so that's my orb now looking a lot better. In fact, if I turn off all those layers, you can see the difference they've made. When I brought in my shadows and then my highlights, it's made a big difference. But there's one more thing I can do which will really make this kind of stand out. First thing I want to do is tidy up my layers. We haven't got that many, however, keeping on top of your layers and organizing them as you go will save you so many headaches. So all my layers are together, so I'm going to hold shift and select all the layers that make up the glass dome here. I'm going to go to the bottom right hand corner of my screen where I've got my little folder icon, and when I click on that it'll create a new group which I'm going to rename glass dome rather imaginatively. And the last thing I'm going to do to really kind of make this stand out as a glass texture is actually add a bevel and emboss effect. To do that, I need to go down to my effects panel in the bottom right hand corner of the screen where it says FX. I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to go up to bevel and emboss. Now when I click on this, I've got a whole load of options and you can really have fun playing around with this. First of all, the style. I've currently got emboss selected, but you know, as we go through that, we can change what we have available to us. In fact, bevel, outer bevel looks quite nice. I like the white that this is adding though, as though the light's kind of illuminating the dome, so I might go with pillow emboss for that. The depth is exactly what it says on the tin. It's quite nice. The size is the size of that outer effect, so we have the white kind of being spread across the whole surface, but this rim, this highlighting, that's what's determined by size. And I actually want that to be reasonably thick because I want to imply that the glass itself has some thickness to it. Soften will obviously soften the edges, so it's less harsh kind of final effect. Angle will change the lighting. I'm quite happy with that as it is. Gloss contour, you'll see when you click on the little arrow to the right hand side that you get all these different shapes, and that changes how the light falls on your object. Ooh, that's a lovely one, actually. What's the difference between that one? It's a bit lighter. I'm tempted with that, but the white's a bit strong. So where it says highlight mode, I'm just going to bring that down ever so slightly. There we go. The lighting's technically wrong with these highlights, but I think it's convincing enough. Might bring up the opacity of the shadow just a bit. In fact, I might have brought it down there actually. Okay, I'm happy with that, so I'm going to click OK. And now that's looking an awful lot better. We're really kind of getting a glass feel to that, a nice texture. However, we only want half of this because the bottom half we're going to add our pattern to. We're pretty much going to do the same thing with the shadows and what have you, but we need to actually get rid of half of this. Now, instead of rubbing things out and trying to trim stuff off, what we're going to do is we're going to use a mask to hide the bottom of this orb. And that's called working non-destructively. You want to do that as much as possible. Working non-destructively means using masks and not cutting things out and deleting them. Because if we use masks, we can always come back and edit. Whereas if we delete things, they could be lost forever. To add a mask to a group, it's exactly the same as adding a mask to anything else. We go down into the bottom right-hand corner of our screen where we've got this white rectangle with the black dot in it. And when I click on that, a mask appears, which when we have a group is just this white thumbnail that appears next to the folder icon. I might actually bring my guides back. I'm going to go up to view at the top of my screen and go to new guide layout. It remembers your last settings, so often you'll just have to press OK. And I want to select the bottom half of my orb. Easiest way to do that is to go over to my marquee tool and change it to the rectangular marquee. And just drag up and snap to that center guideline there. To hide things with masks, you can see that the thumbnail's white. Whatever's white will show in your final painting. If you paint something black, it will look as though it's rubbing it out, but in reality it's just hiding it. So we go over to our paintbrush. I'm going to make it nice and big just to speed things up. My brush is actually already set to black. And as I start painting, half of my orb has disappeared. However, if I open up the folder, it is actually all still there. It's just hidden. So if, for instance, for some reason I want to bring the whole orb back, I just need to delete that mask. Okay, to get rid of this selection, just press Ctrl D to deselect. And let's go to view and clear guides very quickly to see what we've got. And I'm liking what we've got there. So before I progress any further, I'm going to save my work. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, and save a Photoshop document. I'm going to call this Sneakoscope Demo and save. As with all programs, we don't know when it's going to crash. We don't know when we're going to have issues, so we regularly save. Right, let's do the base. So I've got all that layered up. I'm going to add a new layer to start off with the base. So I've got my new layer here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in the texture I want to use. So in this instance, I've got this kind of jazzy 70s wallpaper vibe going on. And I'm going to use my elliptical marquee tool that I've got selected to decide what part of this texture I want to see on the base. And I might go for kind of a bit of half and half, maybe something like that. Okay, and we're doing the same thing. We're going to right click and rasterize that image, and then we're going to go up to filter, distort and spherize, hit OK, distorting the image. Let's do that again just to really exaggerate it. And it'd be nice to include some of that red, but I think I might be stuck in that regards. I might bring the effect down. It's not as strong and realistic, but it does bring some of that red in, which I do want. Control J to copy that to a new layer, and in this instance we're just deleting the one below. So to move this around, quick little shortcut. I could go up to the move tool on the left hand side and click and move it around, or I could just press Control T. And what that does, that allows me to move my object, but it also allows me to scale it, stretch it and rotate it, which is going to be very useful in a second. So Control T is a shortcut to a few more things you can do. I want to get this aligned dead center, so I'm going to go up to View and turn my guides back on. Just going to cancel that. There we go. So Control T, going to move this into the center like so. Brilliant. And then Control T, actually I should have done that first. I'm going to stretch this out because on my image reference I think the bottom's just a little bit bigger. Move that back up so it's all centered. Ooh. There we go. Click on the tick at the top of the screen, and then we're going to do the same thing as we did before, where we create a mask, select in this case the top half, get my paintbrush and paint it all away. Control D to deselect, and my image is a little bit too wide, so I'm going to click on my thumbnail in my layers panel, Control T, and just squash that in, and it should snap automatically. I'm going to turn my guides off again. A little bit annoying, but it means that we can see everything that we're doing. And we need to obviously add our shading in. So we're going to add a new layer, right click and create clipping mask, bump my brush size up, set it to black, and we're just going to come halfway down like so. Reduce it to about kind of 20%. Add a new layer, right click, create clipping mask. I'm not going to skip through this because it's good practice. I think a lot of people trip themselves up just by trying to skip ahead and not paying attention to everything or practicing what they've done. So a little bit repetitive, but if you do want to skip ahead, you can just fast forward it along. Let's come down here and we'll just add some more prominent shadows on the side. I might go a little stronger with these just to exaggerate it. There we go. New layer, and this is our highlight layer, so set that to white, bring my brush size down, and we'll do something like that. And then add the reflection, which we'd have on the base a little bit as well. I reckon we'd have a smidge here. I'm going to change this to overlay, so going into the layer mode and changing it to overlay. Oh, that's come out quite nice. I'm happy with that. Maybe add a bit more in on the left. Reduce the opacity ever so slightly, it's just a bit too harsh. There we go. A new layer, right click, create clipping mask, and we'll just put a little highlight there as well. In fact, I might move that slightly so it'd be on the top. Maybe there's something on the ground that's reflecting a little bit. I might reduce the opacity a smidge. There we go. Okay, we need to organize our layers. So shift and select everything. Click on the folder icon. I'm going to call this, let's call this we'll just call it base actually. Keep it nice and easy. Now you'll see that on the glass, I've got the layer mask on the whole group. On the base, I've got the layer mask just on the texture itself. You can do it either way around. It's completely up to you. This is just all part of what I keep saying about there being 1,000,001 ways doing the same thing in so many programs. You'll find your own way of doing these things, your own tips and tricks. So we've completed another big stage. So quickly file, and I can just click save. There we go. Now we need to add the rim in the center. So add a new layer. This needs to be right on the top. It's got to cover both of these. And I'm going to go to my shape tool, and let's go to the rectangle tool and drag something out like so. And you can see that even with the guides disabled, the center of my page has come up pink there. So we can still find the center even without the guides. That's a little bit long, I reckon. So I'm going to hold down Alt to scale both sides at the same time. And I actually want the corners to be rounded. And what I can do to change this is by going over to the right-hand properties bar, which is over on the right-hand side here. And you can see that if I scroll down, I've got these 4 icons, which is my corners, and you can see that they're curved. They all say 0 pixels at the moment, so all of them are nice sharp 90-degree corners. But if I change one of these to 50, you see that they all change, and now the corners of my trim here have been rounded. So we need to first of all change the color as well. So I'm going to go up to appearance, and where it says fill, I'm going to change that to black. Oh, come on, there we go. The reason why I changed my shapes to black is just as a habit of thumbnailing when I'm doing kind of environment, concept art and the like. It also makes it really stand out. So there's my rectangle. I'm going to apply a texture to this. I'm going to go into my folder, and I've got this metal texture that I've downloaded, and not too, in fact I might shrink this down a little bit like so. Get it roughly into position, click on the tick, and then right click and create clipping mask so that texture is centered on the shape there. And actually I'm happy with that placement. We need to do the same thing, add a bit more shading. So add a new layer, right click and create clipping mask. Let's zoom in. Quick shortcut for that is Control and plus. There we go. Paintbrush. Yeah, that's big enough. Right, so if my light's coming from the top, if it's coming from this top right hand corner, obviously the bottom of this is going to be darker, so I need to come along the bottom here. I'm going to reduce the opacity of that. And if it's coming from this side, then the whole left-hand side of this will be slightly darker. I'm going to make my brush a bit bigger. So I'm just going to come along and do that like so. There we go. I'm going to bring this opacity down and then do basically the exact same thing on the second layer, but just a bit stronger. There we go. New layer, right click, create clipping mask, set it to white. Gonna do my highlights. So I'll have highlights here and here, because if the light's still coming from the front, so it's going to slightly trim off here. And probably have something like that. Reduce the opacity. Change the layer mode to overlay just to actually brighten up the surface of the texture itself. Might paint in a bit more on the left here. And then new layer, right click, create clipping mask. And I just need to add that highlight there. And then across the top, just to brighten that back up. Let's zoom out. It's not looking too bad. It could look a lot better though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some kind of big strip highlights as though it's got a chiseled edge. So add a new layer. Doesn't need to clip. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the lasso tool. And that's the third tool down on the left hand side. Now mine's set to polygonal lasso tool. And yours will probably look like this one, just a standard lasso tool by default if you've never done this before. So I'm going to actually hold down and I want the polygon lasso tool. And I'm going to create some highlights right at the top here. I'm going to do that by clicking and dragging. I'm going to come down slightly on one side and then join it back up. So I've got this really long triangle. I'm going to get the paint bucket tool on the left hand side, about halfway down. You might have the gradient tool by default. It might look like this, so just click and hold and go to the paint bucket tool. I'm going to fill it with bright white. Again, Control D to deselect. And then I'm going to change this to overlay, and I'm going to reduce the opacity. So it's basically creating this really harsh reflection that I might actually rub out towards the end. So I might get my eraser tool, works identically to the paintbrush tool. And I'm just going to blend that out. And when I zoom out now, you see that's looking a little bit better. I'm going to add another one. And I might add it just underneath. Like so. Fill it with white. Control D to deselect. Change the layer mode to overlay. Reduce the opacity. If the edge is too harsh for you, what you can do is get the Magic Wand tool, fourth tool down on the left hand side. Click the outside, so anywhere but your shape. And then you can right click and go down to an option that says feather. And a little menu will pop up telling you how many pixels you essentially want to blur and blend. And it's a bit of a trial and error depending on what quality document you have set up. I'm just going to click OK on that. And I think I actually deselected there. So Control D to deselect. There we go. Right click and feather. Hit OK. And I'm going to hit delete. And that's way too big. So I need to bring that selection right down. So right click and feather. Let's bring it down to 1. And then when I hit delete, that's better. It's now nicely blending those out. In fact, I might do it with layer 15. So again, Magic Wand, right click and feather. 1 pixel works for me, so hit OK. Hit delete on my keyboard, and you can see it's now blended that out a little bit. I'm going to press Control T and move layer 16 a bit further up. And then when I come out, it's looking a little better. I think maybe one of my shadows is a bit too strong. Yeah, it's layer 11. So we're just going to bring that down. And I might add a new layer. And effectively do the same thing, but with the shadows. So deselect that. I need to right click and create clipping mask on this one. And then I'm going to get the magic wand, right click and feather. I'm going to make this a little bigger. I'm going to make it 3. Hit delete and reduce the opacity. And that looks really good. So we're going to add another one of those. Right click, create clipping mask. But we're going to do it for the really kind of intense areas. Again, you could just do this with a paintbrush. This is just the way I like doing it. Right click, feather. Hit delete. And we're just going to bring that opacity down a little bit. There we go, that's looking an awful lot better. Lovely stuff. I actually changed the hue. I wonder if it's such a cold grey that that's what's disorientating. So I'm going to go up to FX, going to go to Colour Overlay, and we're going to bring some of that gold in. Like so. So I've got it set to hard light. Just scroll through these and find the one that's relevant. In fact, soft light works rather well. Let's do that. There we go. See, ooh, have I just deleted that? No, I haven't. So if I use the colour overlay, you see that if I toggle that on and off, the difference that makes. So that was just throwing me there. Right, so another big chunk done. Let's go to File and Save. And now we need to add the little kind of spinny bit on the bottom. So we're going to create a new orb. First of all, we're going to organize our layers again. So all of those are my trim. There we go. So we can toggle that off now. See the effect of that. Let's go down to the base. So new layer. We're going to make this nice and straightforward. We're not going to mess around too much with this. We're going to get the ellipse tool, actually, so the ellipse shape tool. We're going to bring back our guides. There we go. Going to hold shift and draw out a tiny little orb like that. We're going to bring our metal texture back in. Whoa, that's big. Like so. Pop it there. Right click and create clipping mask. There we go. Add a new layer. Right click, create clipping mask. We're not going to do half as many shading techniques because it's such a small part of the concept. So we'll add another one. We'll add a tiny highlight. Like so. We'll probably keep it like that, I reckon. So now I'm going to mask it off. So I'm going to add my mask, get my marquee tool, select the area I want to mask off, get my paintbrush, set it to black, and hide that. And then Control T. I'm going to then disable my guides by going up to View and Clear Guides. And let's zoom in. And we want to add a new clipping mask. I'm going to open up that layer, a group even, create clipping mask, set it to black, and just create that shadow there. Good stuff. And then we need to actually add some shadows to the main body here. So I'm going to go back into my base, add a new layer, create clipping mask, bump my brush size up, not that big actually, let's keep it 200, and let's add a shadow under here. Like so, that's nice. and we're going to add a tiny shadow at the base here. Let's zoom out of that. It's distorted it a little bit. I'm just going to bring in my rubber tool then. Clean that up. There we go. I think this undershadow is still a bit strong, so let's go into the trim and bring that down. That's better. Right, file and save. Nearly at the end now. The last thing we have to do is the funky stuff that's in the center of the orb here. If I actually go to my image reference, we've kind of got this ridge, this dome, and this ball in the center. Now I'm actually going to cheat. I think it's really similar to what I've got going on with the trim here. So I'm actually just going to duplicate that by clicking on that group and pressing Ctrl J. I want this to be underneath the trim and the base and the dome potentially. I can't remember how transparent I made it. I didn't, so I need it above the dome. There we go. Ctrl T, and I'm basically just going to move this around. In fact, because I'm not going to, if I undo that, because I'm not going to be doing any more to this, I'm going to right click and merge that group so it's just an image. It's going to make it a little bit easier to align everything. So hold down Alt to make everything symmetrical. Bring this down. I might actually go to Edit, Transform, and Perspective to create that kind of curved like shape. If I go back to my image reference, it goes all the way mostly to the edge. So, oh, that's it. Press T there. I need to press Control T. Alt, let's drag that out. This would be a little more faded because it's behind the glass, so I might go to FX and Color Overlay. Apply a white. Might do normal at first and just bring the opacity down. Might reduce the opacity a little bit as though the glass is being reflected. There we go. We've got a dome, haven't we? So we've got another dome of colour. And what I might do just to make this, just for time-wise, is, well, I've got my trim copy there. That needs to go into a new group. What should we call this one? Dome Ridge, something like that. Let's add a new layer underneath that. There we go. And we're going to get the shape tool, and we're going to create two. Well, we're going to create one dome, a little ball that rolls around, and we're just going to change the fill over in the properties. Let's change that to a darkish blue, maybe a bit darker than that. There we go. Let's add a quick bit of shading, really quick. Create clipping mask. That's the ellipse there, yep. Paintbrush, set it to black. I'm going to rasterize that layer for some reason. That's been, there we go, and let's just add something really basic. Like so. New layer, right click, create clipping mask. Let's go right in. new layer, right click, create clipping mask, change it to white. And I'm not sure if overlays are really going to make too much of a difference. Add a new layer, right click, create clipping mask, reduce the size of our brush. There's my highlight. Maybe reduce that a little bit. I don't think I put my other highlight on. There we go. Just paint that in. Lovely stuff. We're going to mask some of that off, so I'm going to select all of those layers, put them in a group. We'll call this, ball. We're going to get our marquee tool. In fact, we're going to add the mask. There we go. Marquee tool. Drag it so it snaps. Paintbrush. Set it to black and hide all of that. And then what I'm going to do is basically just copy that. FX, color overlay, and we'll change the color to white. In fact, actually no, what we should do is let's go to our adjustments panel, which is the circle that's half black and half white. And we're going to go to hue saturation and bring the saturation right down. We're going to right click and create clipping mask so it only affects the ball there. We'll pop those into a new group and call it ball again. Control T. May as well merge it, right click and merge group. We're going to bring that right down. And then same thing, we're going to add a mask, get our marquee tool, get my paintbrush, get rid of that, and we might go to FX color overlay and just lighten that up a bit. In fact, the ball could do with that. FX color overlay. There we go, just as though it's behind the glass. And there we are. So hopefully everybody's been able to follow along with that relatively easily. There's a lot more things we could do to this to really push it up to another level. As I said, that rim in the center, I just copied this one. I could have done it from scratch and made it a bit more realistic, as I could have done with this center bit here. But you kind of get the gist of what we're doing here. We've got a nice concept that we can, showing off a prop. The background, we can maybe present that a bit better. If I click on the background, I could go to filter, blur, and we could just do, if we right click and rasterize that, we might have a few more options. Let's do lens blur. And that's just going to add a general blur to the background. So now my prop really kind of pops out there. In fact, that alone makes it look a whole lot better. And then if we add a new layer, we never paint on the background. I'm going to get my paint bucket tool, set it to black, and then that just presents my image a little better. So there we have it. Hopefully everyone's enjoyed that. Hopefully everyone's followed along nicely, and hopefully this project should offer as a starting point for more advanced concept art. But there is how to create a Sneakoscope in Photoshop.